Okay, next we're going to talk about graphing functions and their inverses. And there's a typo. Remember that an inverse interchanges the x and y values. Therefore, it interchanges the x and y coordinates on the graph as well. Oftentimes, it's easier to do a t-chart and get x and y values, and then you flip the x and y values for your inverse. The graph of an original function and its inverse are symmetric about the line y equals x. What does symmetric mean? The same on both sides, okay? So what you're going to do is graph the function f, then use the graph to determine whether the inverse of f is a function, and you'll use the vertical line test. So I'm going to make a t-chart with x and y. This is my original function, which is my f of x, okay? You're going to choose 3 values for x. Use positive, negative, and 0. For this one, I'm going to use 2, 0, and negative 2. We're going to plug them into our equation. Could you pick any numbers you want? Yes, I'm just choosing these numbers, but you could choose any ones that you want, but have a positive, a negative, and 0. Okay? When I plug 2 in here, 2 times 2 is what?
4.
And 4 minus 1 is 3. So my y is 3 when my x is 2. Then we're going to plug in 0. 2 times 0 is, and 0 minus 1 is negative 1. We plug in negative 2. 2 times negative 2 is, and negative 4 minus 1 is negative 5. So we're going to plot our function. So we go right 2, up 3. Remember, when graphing, your up and down is your y, your right and left is your x. Going right is positive, left is negative, up is positive, down is negative. Hopefully you're okay with plotting points. Okay. So we plotted 2, 3. So 0, negative 1 is 0, and then down 1. And then we have negative 2 and down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if you notice, that makes a line. Okay. Now for your inverse. I'm going to do this in a different color so it's easy for me to see on my graph. You can do whatever you want though. And I write it as f to the negative 1 of x. You might also want to mark this line as this is your f of x line. So in this, I don't have to plug in values anymore. All I'm going to do is exchange x and y. So if I'm exchanging x and y, what's going to be my first ordered pair? 3, 2 is correct. You're just flipping them around. What's my next order pair going to be? Negative 1, 0. And my next one? Okay, and then we go and plot the points. So we go right 3, up 2. And we go left 1 and up 0. And then left 5 and down 2. Yes?
I wasn't paying attention. Where do you get the x number from?
So I just go with each of these order pairs and exchange the x and y. So you're just flipping it around. Remember when we were doing the inverse and we exchanged x and y? Instead of like resolving this equation and then plugging in values and trying to find the answers, if you get ordered pairs for your original function, your inverse is just going to be flipping around the x and the y's.
How about for the first one?
Oh, we just chose them. So I told you you can pick any 3 values, but pick a positive, a negative, and a 0. So I just picked 2. Yes, you could use negative 1 and positive 1. Just use a positive and a negative.
And a 0.
And a 0. Okay, so I can draw this line here. And this is f to the negative 1 of x. Oops. And then the question is, and you're only looking at your inverse, okay? So is my inverse, is this line a function? Yes. And if you do your vertical line test, remember it just can only cross at one point. And you're only looking at the purple line, not both of the lines. Okay? So the answer is yes. The inverse is a function. So if you look, and really, basically what you're looking at is your x values. If your x values don't repeat, it's probably a function. If your x values repeat, then it's not a function. But the vertical line test is basically, if you were to draw vertical lines, it would only hit one point on the graph at a time. And you're only looking at the purple line, not both of the lines. Okay? Yes? All right. Are you ready to move on? So on example 7, I'm going to do the same thing where I make a t-chart, because it's really the easiest way is using a t-chart. Since you have a fraction with 1/3, in order to get rid of the 1/3, you'd want this number to be a multiple of 3. So what do you think would end up being the easiest numbers?
6, 9, 12.
Right, and even smaller would just be 3, right? So we can use 3, 0, and negative 3. If this fraction was 1/2, you'd want to use 2, 0, negative 2. If it was 4, you'd want to use 4, 0, negative 4. Okay. So when we plug 3 in here, you always want to do your squared term first. So 3 squared is 9, and then 9 divided by 3 is 3, and 3 minus 2 is 1. When you plug in 0, 0 squared is 0 times 1/3 is 0, and then 0 minus 2 is, very good. And we plug in negative 3. Negative 3 squared is 9. 9 divided by 3 is 3, and 3 minus 2 is 1. So we graph our original function. We go right 3, up 1. We have 0 and then negative 2. Am I doing something wrong? Just kidding. 0, negative 2. There we go. And then negative 3 up 1. And what kind of graph does this make? A parabola. A U-shaped graph curving up.
Wait, how'd you get 4 points or something?
This was not an actual point. I tried to scribble it out.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say, what?
All right, so that's my f of x equation. Now I want to find my inverse equation. So what are going to be the ordered pairs for my inverse equation? Good. 1, 3, negative 2, 0, 1, negative 3. Now, by looking at the x values, did the x values repeat? And they have different y values, which tells me that it's probably going to not be a function. But let's look it out in the graph. So we go right 1, up 1, 2, 3, left 2, up 0, and then right 1, down 3. So notice on this one it ends up being a sideways parabola. And if you did the vertical line test on here, see how on the purple one, if you drew a line, it would hit 2 points, which means that it's not a function. Okay, the vertical line test doesn't work. It can only hit 1 point at a time. And again, if you notice here, my x is repeated, which means it's not going to be a function.
No.
So the answer is no. The inverse is not a function. Okay, questions on 7? All right, on 8 they have just these ordered pairs. So all we're doing is looking at the inverse, okay? So if this is my original function, h to the negative 1, my inverse function are going to be what ordered pairs? Five, negative 3. All we're doing is exchanging x and y. And my other one is going to be 5, negative 2. Without graphing this, would you say yes, the inverse is a function, or no, it's not a function? How do you know it's not a function? The x's do not repeat. So I'm going to put no, the inverse is not a function. See right here? The x's repeat.
Yeah, you said no.
So that's why it's not a function. Because if you were to do the vertical line test, it won't work. And we can go ahead and graph it. We go right 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, down 3, and right 5, down 2. And see if you were to do a vertical line test, see how it hit 2 points? That means it's not a function. If you were to draw a vertical line, it hits 2 points.
Just as the first one repeats, right?
Yes, just the first. The second one can repeat. The x's can't. What do you think is going to be the easiest way to find the inverse on example 9?
Do t-chart.
Good. Do a chi chart for your original equation and then flip around your x's and y's. What numbers do you guys want to use?
Negative 2, 0.
Okay, 2, 0, negative 2. When we plug in 2, 2 squared is 4, and 4 plus 3 is 7. You plug in 0, 0 squared is 0, 0 plus 3 is 3. Negative 2, when you plug in negative 2 squared is 4, and 4 plus 3 is 7. So my inverse, f to the negative 1 of x, my x and y values are what? 7, 2, 3, 0, 7, negative 2. By just looking at your x and y values, is this going to be a function? No, because your x values repeat. No, the inverse is not a function.
So you always have to invert them? Always?
When you're checking if the inverse is a function, yes.
Alright.
And again, if you wanted to graph it, you'd go right 7 up 2. You don't have to because they're just asking you the question. But you can see right there, it makes a sideways parabola, and the vertical line test would not work. Questions? Example 10, what I would do is write these original points. So this point right here, what is that point?
1 and 2.
Negative 1, 1 is that first point. Let's just write our original ones right now. The second point is at 1, 2, and my third point is at 3, 0. Okay, so now let's write our inverse points. So f to the negative 1 of x, my inverse points are going to be 1, negative 1, 2, 1, 0, 3. Do you think this is going to be a function?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, the inverse is a function. If you wanted to plot those points on the graph, you would see that they would pass the vertical line test. But you know it does because none of the x's repeat. And that is the end.